tires. So I'm going to go ahead and start and tell them, hey, look, the first thing I'm looking for is to make sure that this truck doesn't have any major damage. So what I'm looking for is that the truck ain't wrecked, that I don't see any parts falling or dragging. Everything is safely attached to the truck where it's safe for me to drive it down the road. After that, I want to go ahead and make sure that it doesn't have any types of leaks. I'm going to check for air leaks and I'm going to check for fluid leaks. So for the fluid leaks, the first thing I'm going to do is look underneath the truck, make sure I don't see anything dripping from the motor, the transmission, the radiator, any type of fluid leaking from it. And I'm also going to look on the ground to make sure that there are no puddles, because maybe it dripped all night, it's not dripping anymore, but there's a big old puddle of oil underneath my truck. For the air leaks, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk around the truck listening, making sure I don't hear air leaking from any hoses or any other parts. And the last thing, the tires, well, I'm just going to come over here and look down the side of the truck to make sure I don't see any low tires or flat tires. And I'm sorry, let me back up. Part of the instructions say only inspect the driver's side. So that's why I came to this side. So we only have to inspect the driver's side unless you have unique parts, which we do have a few parts. Parts that you don't have on the driver's side that are only on the passenger side will be your unique parts. There's about 3 or 4, and I'm going to show you which ones they are. So just cover the damages, cover the leaks, cover the flats, and you're done with the very first section that says front of the vehicle. And then you could even tell them, okay, now that I'm done with that one, I'm going to move on to my lights and reflectors. And I'm going to start right here with this headlight and the turn signal, which this is my left turn signal, and over there the right turn signal. And the top ones, which are my clearance lights, you do not have to worry about the ones on the mirrors because not all trucks have those. Those are just extra accessories on this one. They just want these main ones down the middle right here. So when checking the lights, the first thing that I need to do is make sure that they're all securely mounted. Most of these are attached with screws, so you can just say make sure they're securely mounted with the screws, because I don't want any of them loose or falling off. Second, I want to check the condition of the lights to make sure that they're not cracked or broken, because if they are, moisture can get inside them and burn the light bulbs out. Third, I want to check that they are the correct color. Headlights should always be clear or white. Everything else, turn signals and clearance, should all be amber in color on the front. The functions, which is another thing that I also have to check. This light here, this headlight has 2 functions. It has a low beam and it has a high beam that I have to make sure both work. The turn signals, well, they're turn signals, but they're also my 4-way flashers. Some of y'all might call them emergency lights or hazard light. That's okay. You can call them that as well. The clearance lights up on top, well, those just turn on when I turn the lights on, so it's just one function and that's it. So that covered every single light. And as far as the reflectors, well, as you can see, this truck doesn't have any reflectors on the front for me to inspect. And that's all you need to tell them, and right there you're done with your lights and your reflectors. Now, I'm going to move on to the engine compartment. So this is where you go ahead and unstrap your hood, come to the front of it right here and just grab it. Jesse, what happened, Jesse? I thought you got both of them.
I was going to, brother. I thought you were going to the
Ah, you're good, man. I'm messing up. So, engine compartment. Remember they said the driver's side, so just come to the driver's side, When you come to the engine compartment, there's 4 fluids, there's 4 parts to the engine, and all the hoses have to get inspected. So you can start with your fluids right away, and as you can see, the fluids are pretty much right here jumping out at you right away. So look, this is my engine coolant reservoir. Got the engine coolant inside. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that it's securely mounted with all the nuts and the bolts. Also making sure that the hoses are secured with the clamps, because I don't want anything falling off, and I also don't want any other fluid leaking from where the hoses are connected here. I want to check that the cap ain't missing or loose, because I don't want to leak from there either. And I want to check this reservoir that it's not cracked or broken, because if it is, that's also going to cause it to leak the fluid out, the engine coolant. You got to check all that on that one. And the most important thing is that you look right here, see how it says add in full? That you always check that you have the correct amount And you're not gonna physically do it, guys. It's just something, it's just an explanation. You're not gonna physically do anything. You're not gonna open it. You're not gonna pull out a dipstick. You just have to tell them, I would just make sure that I have the correct amount, that it's in between the add and the full, right there. So that's it for that one. Over here, this is my power steering fluid reservoir. I'm gonna do the same thing, which is first to make sure everything is securely mounted so nothing's loose or falling. Check for leaks, making sure that the hoses are secured so I don't leak there. Make sure this ain't cracked or broken so it ain't leaking from anywhere else. Make sure the cap ain't missing so we ain't leaking from there either, that it's tight. And again, most important that we have the correct amount. This sticker you see right here, the bottom line, that is the add. And the top line of the sticker, that is the full. So I just gotta make sure that it's in between this add and full mark right here. Then you got the windshield washer fluid right here. Same thing again, look, I just gotta make sure that one's securely mounted with the nuts and the bolts. Nothing's loose, cracked, broken, so it don't leak. Hose is secured to it so they don't leak. Cap not missing or loose so it don't leak from there. But this one does not have a gauge that says add and full, because that's something I use up all the time to clean my windows. So every chance I get, I'm just gonna come and try to fill it up as much as I can, as often as I can, to keep it as full as I can. That's all you gotta tell them. And then the last one, which is the one that's kind of hidden a little bit, if you look at the end of the stick right there, you'll see the little yellow ring. That is your engine oil dipstick, where you put your finger in there to grab it and pull it out. But just point at it like I'm pointing at it right there with the stick. You don't have to pull it out. Like I said, if you want to show them an example, just point and say, look, that's the engine oil dipstick right there. I would just grab it, use this stick as an example. I would pull it out, clean it, put it back in there, pull it out again, find the add and the full marks on the dipstick, make sure the oil level is somewhere in between those two lines, put it all the way back in, and look around the engine just one more time to make sure it's not leaking any oil. And those are your 4 fluids. Now the 4 parts. Not this first hose, but this second hose right here. The bigger one of the two. If you follow it, you can see right at the end of the hose right there where there is a clamp. Well, that hose is clamped onto your water pump. I'll get out of y'all's way so y'all can get in there and look. But yeah, so that hose is clamped onto the water pump. So all you have to do is just right there, just like I did, put the stick right there, point right there and say, look, that hose is clamped onto the water pump. That water pump right there on the front, I gotta make sure that it's securely mounted with every single nut and bolt so it's not loose, falling off. Check the condition of it, that it's not cracked or broken, because I don't want it to be leaking the engine coolant that's circulating through it. And I have to let you know that that is a belt-driven water pump, because if you look right on the front, you can see the belt right there that turns it. So it's a belt-driven water pump. I'm not checking the belt yet, so just don't jump into the belt until you finish with everything with your water pump first. If you are done, tell them, okay, look, now that I'm done with the water pump, now I'm gonna go ahead and inspect the belt, which is that one right there. When checking the belt, what I have to do is push on it somewhere where it has a little bit of slack to make sure that it does not have any more than 3/4 of an inch of slack or play. Because if it's got too much slack or play, well, it can cause it to come loose, or it's just not gonna turn the components fast enough and they ain't gonna work correctly.
So you just point at it?
You just point at it, you don't do anything. Nothing's physical here, it's just explaining stuff to them. And the other thing I'm gonna do is look at it to inspect it, that it doesn't have any rips or tears or cuts, because that could also cause it to fall off and lose the belt, and then nothing's gonna work at all. So that's 2 parts, the water pump, the belts. The other 2 parts to the engine are unique parts to the passenger side. So this is where you want to go to the other side. If you look right there at the end of the stick, looks just a little bit bigger than the softball. That is your alternator right there at the end of the stick. So don't be afraid to squeeze in there, guys. Make sure everybody gets a good look at these parts. You ain't that big of a group today, so take advantage and just get in there and look. But that's your alternator right there at the end of the stick. Just tell them, look, again, the alternator, I'm going to make sure that it's securely mounted with the nuts and the bolts as well, so it's not loose or falling. Second, I want to check the condition on that alternator, that it's not cracked or broken, so it does work correctly. Third, the alternators have the cables and the wires coming from the battery connected to it. So you have to tell them I have to make sure that I check those connections, that they are clean of rust or corrosion, because I want to have a good flow of electricity from the alternator to the battery so it can charge them correctly. And if you look again on the front, it has the same belt that I already inspected, because that is also a belt driven part. So you just tell them the same belt that you already inspected, so you don't have to talk about the belt all over again, because you already checked it the one time and it's the same belt. But do let them know that that is belt driven. Right above it, right there, you can see the belt again on another little pulley, the little round circle right there. So that one's the hardest one to see, but that is your air compressor. So just put the stick around putting it right there, and that's all you got to do. They really can't see the air compressor. It's hidden behind everything else right there. So just put the stick there and say, look, that's my air compressor. Again, I'll make sure that one's securely mounted as well, so it's not falling or loose. Second, check the condition that that's not cracked or broken. And here, the reason I want to check that is because if it is cracked or broken, well, it's going to leak the air. Well, it's not going to be any good. It's not going to work. And if you look in front of it, again, it's got the same belt that's turning it. So that also makes it a belt-driven air compressor. So those are your four main parts to the engine: the water pump, the belt, the alternator, and the air compressor. So now you're done with the four parts. So now the only thing left to do is inspect all the hoses. So what you want to do here is just kind of touch all the hoses. Look, like I'm gonna check all of them, checking that the clamps are tight. Some of them have fittings like that, so I just got to make sure fittings are tight, clamps are tight, because I don't want any hoses to be loose, falling off, and I don't want to have any leaks, you know, where the hoses are connected to anything. So once I'm done checking that all the clamps are secured and I don't have leaks at the connections, I also have to inspect the hoses themselves, looking for abrasions, bulges, cuttings, anything that's going to cause them to leak the air or the fluid that's inside of them. Nothing has to be specific name, just hoses. Cover them all and just tell them, and now I got to go do the same thing on the other side of the truck. And you just come over here to this side and you just start touching hoses over here too. And look, you got all these hoses everywhere. Again, say, look, I'll do the same thing. Look, checking these clamps, checking these fittings, and none of these are loose, so we don't have any leaks of air or fluid.
We don't necessarily have to physically touch them, just touch them with that.
That's it.
That's it. Okay.
That's it. That's all you got to do. That's what the stick is for, guys. Not only that, you don't want to stick your hand in there. Something might be hot and you're going to burn yourself. Then you're going to be in the emergency room instead of doing your test. So that's what this is for, guys. That's all you got to do. You don't physically do anything. You don't grab anything. You don't try to pull anything loose. It's just an explanation. That's all it is. So everything I covered right there was the engine compartment. Now I'm going to go ahead and check the steering components. This bar that you see right here, kind of goldish color right here, starts right here and it comes all the way over here. That is your steering column. So just tell them, look, this is the steering column. I'm going to make sure it's securely mounted on this end with the nuts and the bolts, but also on this end over here. Anytime you got a long part that has to be secured on both ends, make sure you let them know that. That it's got to be secured on both ends, because we don't want it coming loose here or there. And this one right here, the steering column. You see how it comes here and it goes all the way up there? So just look, so first I'm going to make sure it's securely mounted on both ends with the nuts and the bolts. And then I'm going to check the condition to make sure that it is straight, not twisted or bent or cracked. Otherwise it's not going to work correctly. And it is two parts to it, so it does have to be full of grease. So it can be adjusting in length. The two parts can adjust in length as the truck goes up and down. Also, if I were to grab that and I try to turn it to the right, or I try to turn it to the left, it should not have more than 10 degrees of play, because if it's got too much play, that can cause you to lose control of the truck as well. Right here, at the end, right there at the end of the stick, that is the U-joint that's connecting the two parts together right here. So I have to make sure that that U-joint right there is securely mounted, that it's not cracked or broken, and that's also full of grease, so it doesn't wear out as it's turning, because you're turning it back and forth. And this area is around the U-joint. These holes that you see right here on both sides of it, we got to make sure that they're clean of debris, that there's nothing stuck in there, because if something gets stuck in there like this stick, well, we're not going to be able to turn it right or left, or a rock, anything can get stuck in there that we can jam it up so you won't be able to turn it. Always make sure those areas are clean. So the steering column, the U-joint, and now this one, this is the steering box. I know a lot of y'all might call it the gearbox, but you want to try to call it the steering box, because that's what the book calls it. So the steering box right here, again, first thing, look, it's got nuts and bolts. So I'm going to make sure that it's securely mounted with those nuts and bolts so that's not loose or falling off. Second, it is full of power steering fluid. Look, this hose right here, it goes straight to it and it fills it up with power steering fluid. So I'm going to check that it's not cracked or broken, otherwise it's going to leak all that power steering fluid and it's not going to be any good. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and inspect the hose one more time to make sure that it's secured on both ends and it's not damaged or leaking. Make sure you always cover that hose when you cover the steering box, because on the test, they're together side by side. Right here, this one right here, this is a pitman arm. That's a drag link. That's a control arm over there. But if you look at all the parts, they're linked together. That's why it's called your steering linkage. So you don't really have to remember the names, the pitman arm, the drag link, the control arm. You can simply just say, look, I'm gonna check all my steering linkage. And look, it starts here and follow it with the stick. Everything that you see joined together all the way to this end over here. So all of this, and you just run the stick up and down like that. So that's all the steering linkage. Yes, it does have a lot of nuts and bolts holding it here, there, and just pretty much at every joint. So we're gonna check that all of those are tight so nothing's coming loose. Condition, make sure nothing is cracked or broken so everything works correctly. The joints do have to be also full of grease, so we'll make sure they're full of grease so they don't wear out fast. And if we grab those parts and we try to wiggle them around, again, we're looking to make sure that there's not a lot of play there, because that could also cause us to lose control of the truck there as well. The steering linkage, that's all you got to remember. And just most important, do this with the stick. That's it. Well, we said this one goes to the steering box. Well, this one over here on this side, this one goes to the power steering pump. But if you look at it, this one comes this way. And then right there, you lose sight of it. But that hose keeps on going all the way to the back of the engine, way back there where you can't see it. That's where your power steering pump is at. So that's all you have to do. Just tell them, look, at the end of this hose, on the back side of the engine, that's where my power steering pump is. When I do get in there to inspect it, I'm going to make sure it's securely mounted with the nuts and the bolts so it's not falling or loose, that it's not cracked or broken so it's not leaking the power steering fluid that's inside of it. And I have to let you know that that is a gear driven part, because there are no belts on the back side of the engine, only on the front. So that's a gear driven part. And that's all you got to tell them, because you can't see it, like I said. So just at the hose on the back side of the engine. So that was all my steering components right there. Now over here on the steering axle, like I said, you don't have to tell them anything for the axle except that it's broken down into 3 sections: suspension, brakes, and tires, which are right here. And that you're going to start with the suspension parts first. So if you look inside here, I know it's kind of dark, but that is the main frame. The frame starts here on the front, and you can see the frame where it keeps going all the way over there to the back of the truck. It's that straight one inside there. So just anywhere you can touch it, here or here or here, it's all the frame. You just tell them I'm just going to inspect it, like just to make sure that it's straight. That's the first thing I always want to check, that it's straight, not twisted or bent or cracked anywhere. But I'm also going to be looking for illegal welds, because the welds weaken the metal, which can cause it to bend or crack or break. So that's one thing you want to look for. And everything else should be securely mounted onto the frame, because it's the main support. Once you're done with your frame, if you look right here on the front, this is a spring mount. What these do is they hold these leaf springs onto the frame. So that's why it's called the spring mount. And you have one holding the front of the leaf spring. And if you really can't see it because it's way underneath the cab, but on this end of the leaf spring over here, you have another one. So you have to at least point and tell them, hey, look, I got a spring mount right here on the front holding the front of the leaf spring, and there's another one over there on the back, and just point back there. And what I have to check on those, well, if you look right away, They have the nuts and the bolts holding them, so I'm gonna make sure they're tight so nothing's loose. And the condition that they're not cracked or broken, otherwise my whole suspension is gonna fall off and be loose. After the spring mounts, well, now I'm gonna go ahead and check the leaf springs to make sure that they are right here, these long ones.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna make sure that the leaf springs are securely mounted front, back, but also right here in the middle. And if you look, there's two of them, one on top of the other one. So I'm always gonna make sure that I have the two, that I'm never missing any of them. And they have to be parallel from the front to the back, straight from one mount to the other. One right on top of the other one, and they should always be straight like this. They should never be shifted or scissored, whatever you wanna call it, twisted one way or the other, because that is a sign that they are loose, broken, or cracked. Right there in the middle, those are the two U-bolts. If you look at them, they look like U's that are upside down right here. So those are the U-bolts, because if you look on the bottom of the U-bolt, you can see that they have some nuts holding them on the bottom. So that's what you're gonna tell them. I'm gonna check that the two U-bolts are secured with the nuts on the bottom, holding everything in place. And I'm also gonna check that they're not cracked or broken, so nothing is coming loose there. And then this one that's straight up and down right here. That's right, that's the shock absorber. You can see that it's straight up and down. And if you look up on this part, you can see that it has a nut and bolt. If you look at the bottom, there's another nut and bolt securing it in place. So that's the first thing you want to do. Make sure it's securely mounted top and bottom with the nuts and the bolts. So it's holding it straight, nothing's loose. And then the condition, those shock absorbers should always be straight like that, because again, it's two parts and they have to be adjusting up and down as you're going on the road, the bumps, the humps, whatever. So they're doing this all day. So if they're twisted or bent, well, they're not going to be any good. Not only that, they have a fluid inside that helps absorb the bumps and the humps on the road. So we have to make sure that the fluid is not leaking out of them. Otherwise, they're no good. So you can see that they're dry. You'll see them, they would be all wet, the oil, all full of oil. But as you can see, they're not. So that's your shock absorber. So those are all your suspension parts: the frame, the spring mount on the front and the back, the leaf springs, the two U-bolts, and those shock absorbers. So once you finish with suspension, the next thing would be your brakes. If you don't mind, turn it on and turn the steering wheel all the way to the left. Y'all can see the brake parts a little better. You don't have to turn it the day of the test, guys. I'm just trying to make it easier for everybody to see the parts right now.